Hello and welcome to Laz Unleashed with myself, Laz Michaelides, and today we are going to be diving in and doing a review of the Disney series of Shogun. So the finale dropped yesterday, and overall I say I was really impressed with the show. I really enjoyed it. So, bit of backstory: I've read the book, and I read it last year, so I was really interested to see how they were going to do it because it is a long. For anyone who's seen it, it is a thick book. There's about 1,500 pages. The audiobook itself took me about 56 hours to get through, and even sometimes I had it on 1.5 times the speed, and it still felt like it took forever. So it's a massive book filled with so much detail and so much depth, so much character development, so much picture painting and telling us of what this 1600 Japan was like. And that is what the book does so well, is that it really immerses you in this culture and makes you feel like you come away from it feeling like you know more about Japanese culture, or you know as much as you did as Blackthorne does as well. So that's quite interesting. But on to the series, and what it did so well. So, as I said, the book is absolutely massive, and you've got so many different storylines going on within it. Now, obviously, you have the main narrative with Blackthorne and his essentially his journey. You've got all these massive threads that go everywhere, and there are so many little side quests going on where we see Blackthorne interacting with this person, Lady Gin talking to Toranaga, and all of these things are going on simultaneously. What I think Disney have done really well here is taking that long, convoluted story and making it way more linear and structured. There is now just one main line. We've still got other little bits going on, but there is one narrative that we follow, and that's what they did so well. And in doing that, what they did is rearranged sections of the narrative from the book. So, for example, we don't actually meet Toranaga and Mariko in the book until a little bit of a way in. We don't meet them until Blackthorne first goes to Osaka. But here we meet them in episode one, which I think is necessary and important. But the way they've done that is just really cleverly chopped bits from the book up. And one part that comes at the end of the book, they've moved to the front. And one part that was in the middle, they've moved to the back. And I think it's really clever writing to sort of be able to focus the series in just one sort of linear way. And I thought that was really impressive. The next thing I really enjoyed about it was how authentic and how real it felt. It doesn't try to do anything except do honour to the book. As funny as it was in places, it doesn't try to be funny. As violent as it was in places, it doesn't try to do the Game of Thronesy thing where it just let's put a bit of violence here for the sake of it and just chop a head off. It's kind of like there's a necessity for it. If it happened in Shogun, it's because it meant something to the story. It wasn't just in there for shock factor. It just does everything necessary to make sure that it works by drawing on its source material and just staying true to the let's say the vibe and the feeling of the original book, which I really enjoyed. And sort of following on from that, the whole way they did it was so Game of Thronesy. Just each character we get to know through conversations, that each character's purpose is and what they're trying to achieve from it. And you've got these snaky characters like Yabu, who is on the surface is kind of a bit, you're not sure whether you like him or not. But then when you get underneath and you find out what he's planning, you're like, all right, this guy's a snake. Each character serving their own purpose, despite saying that they're serving either Toranaga or Ishido. You've got Yabu's self-preservation, Omi's want to sort of impress Yabu, Nagakado's want to impress Toranaga, but as well keep the legacy of his clan going. Lady Ochiba getting involved with Ishido, Mariko not wanting to sort of bow to her feelings about Blackthorne, and Blackthorne just wanting to get his ship back. So you've got all these cool little narratives of people trying to ensure that they get what they want. Yeah. Now, in terms of the feeling of the show, I really thought it had enough lightheartedness to not make it feel so serious, even though it was an incredibly serious show with lots of serious moments that kind of make you go, oh shit, or we're meant to be in some scenes on the edge of our seat and thinking, Jesus, what's happening here? But then it kind of counteracted that. Every episode had a few minutes or a few sections where it was kind of a little more light-hearted. And I think you needed that to give a really good balance to the show and not make it oh so serious. For example, you got the dinner scene, John just in general becoming acclimatized to Japan, you know, learning the customs, seeing things that he's not sure about, you know, eating the natto and stuff like that. The diving practice between him and Toranaga, really, I thought that was hilarious, just watching Toranaga tell him to dive on and on again. The other one that made me laugh was Blackthorne being asked to compliment Kiku's pouring in what I think it was one of episode 6 or 7, which is just to us Westerns is just so unusual to compliment someone on how they pour tea, but that is the culture they had back then, so really interesting. Talking of culture, I thought that was honestly the best thing about this show is just showing us all these little details of how different things were, not only back in the 1600s but over in Japan. I loved how they painted this world and how they made it look and how authentic it felt. It just made it so believable that we were in 1600s Japan. Almost like, I'm not going to say it felt like a documentary, but you know when you're watching something, I'm just going to use Game of Thrones because that is a comparison I've seen a lot of people do to this show. And again, I'm not comparing it, and I'm not saying Game of Thrones did this badly and Shogun did this well. But with Game of Thrones, from the off, you kind of know it's fantasy. And I know that's easy, that's obvious because it's dragons and stuff. But I don't ever feel like you're in our world in Game of Thrones. Whereas Shogun, seeing all these little cultural ceremonies and all these the props and the costumes and the set design, it felt like I was there. It felt like this really could have been filmed in Japan in the 1600s, and I thought that's a massive credit to the production team because it was just so good. For example, the tea making ceremony in one of the last episodes, where a lot of time was spent on watching Buntaro prepare the tea for himself and Mariko. So important just to get an idea that this stuff matters. You know, here, maybe even in England in 1600s, you just put the kettle on and put the tea leaves in and that's it. But in Japan, it's important to get the process right and to mix it correctly. And we see this a lot throughout the whole show, the way they're seated, the council meetings they have, the way that they hold themselves, and the way that, excuse me, the way that formalities and ceremonies unfold. There are rules to follow because in this culture. And I thought it was fantastic to see, and I'm so glad they spent the time on that because that just immersed me more in this feeling of this 1600s Japanese culture, really. Now, also actually, aside, you know, as well as that, the brutal, blunt showing of the darker side of the Japanese traditions back then. They didn't dress it up, did they, for the Western audiences? You know, you might think we all thought in Game of Thrones it was bad to show when, you know, when the pregnant lady was stabbed and all these, you know, heads chopped off, and we're kind of sat there going, whoa, this is a bit far. But the difference is that's fantasy, whereas this is real life. These are real life customs and traditions that occurred back in Japan in those days. So, for example, the death of Fuji's baby in the first episode, Fuji's husband did something wrong, so he dishonored his lord, so he has offered to commit seppuku and end his bloodline, which includes killing his infant child, which is just crazy to us, obviously, because we're just so unused to it. But back then, that's a culture, that was a custom that happened. The boiling, when Yabu boiled one of Anjin's crewmates in the pot, that was unbelievable. The whole seppuku thing as well, there's just this whole idea of dishonoring your leader to such an extent that you feel you have to give your life up for that. Just something that it's so unbelievable for us to try and understand and grasp the concept of, because it's just so alien to us. And, you know, this is 500 or so years ago, so, you know, it's understandable how times have changed, but it still feels so far from what we know now that it's quite hard to grasp. And that point is only made more with the death of the gardener when he moves Blackthorne's pheasant. And we see Blackthorne's reaction to that, which I thought was great, because throughout the series we're watching him become way more acclimatized and becoming used to this Japanese culture that is so alien to him at the start, to the point where, as the leader of the house, he said, right, anyone touch that pheasant, I'll kill you, in a jokey way. But yet the gardener touched the pheasant, and so by law, because the leader of the house said don't do that and he did it, he had to die. I'm not saying it's right, I'm just saying that's the customs of the time. And the other one of that point was Mariko and her family name. The idea that what your grandfather did would have an effect on how you live your life and how people value and look at you in years to come is something also that's quite alien to us. So I thought all these things were really important, because it shows us how different things are or were over there in those times. But I think that's a necessary contrast, because in the end they are human. And we're sat there saying, well, that's so crazy. How can this be allowed to happen? But yeah, even in today, we have different cultures doing different things with different moral values, different beliefs, different principles. So it's not that unusual, but it was kind of like to a way larger extent over in Japan in the 1600s. I'm going to talk a bit more later about the book comparison, but I liked that they did work in a few little stories in from the book. So Omi and Kiku's little romance, Lady Gin's pitch to Toranaga, and I just thought in general, I said it before, but the writing was really good, and it was really important to see how they distributed the time amongst this, because it's so easy just to go full on. Okay, Toranaga versus Ishido, let's just go with this. But they didn't. As I mentioned before, with all the ceremonies and all the brutal Japanese customs being shown, it's important to show these little storylines that are going on. Because we're not just watching one character get through his narrative, we're seeing a culture here. And so distributing the time and making sure they did it correctly was, I thought, a really key feature that they did really well here. Like I said, the ceremonies and all that stuff. So they did that really well. Now to talk about the three main characters and the actors/actress that played them, because these were key. If you get this wrong, then the show falls down, because we need to be fully invested and fully behind the ideas behind these three characters. So it's really important that we know what's going on with them and we feel a connection to them so we can understand. Cosmo Jarvis as Blackthorne, I thought, was brilliant. He really sort of gave, even just his accent just had that really kind of old English sound to it. I can't imagine, it would have been horrible if we had one of those actors that have that kind of modern London voice. I don't really want to shame anyone for having that voice, but every time I hear it, I just don't really like it. And I thought, can you imagine if in the 1600s we had an actor like that who, talk a bit like this, with a bit of a gangster accent and stuff? I don't like it. And so I kind of worried that when I saw Cosmo Jarvis, he's kind of a young guy, isn't he? When I saw him, I thought, oh God, I can kind of imagine how he would sound. But he nailed it, kind of that really posh English accent. I don't remember what Clavel said about his accent in the book. But I thought he was really, really good. And his performance defined the show's success, because we have to be invested in him, because we have to want him to succeed and not get his way, but we have to want to follow him and want to see him succeed in his endeavours, to follow the story and to be part of it. Without him nailing it, it's so much harder to try and then understand from him Mariko and Toranaga. So I think him nailing it had to be the first step, and he did it really, really well, I thought. But Anna Sawai as Mariko, I think, was the second best performance in this show. Her character is so fantastically conflicted all the time. She's got a really horrible relationship with her husband Buntaro, but at the same time we kind of see in places tiny little hints of where their former marriage, why it would have been such a pain for her, because Buntaro, if I remember correctly, Buntaro almost took the responsibility of her family's shame onto himself, which is why she called herself previously Toda Mariko, because she took Buntaro's name. We also see her conflicted with her romance with Blackthorne, because, you know, she knows that she's just meant to be a translator, and she knows she's married, and she had sex with him. I can't remember which episode it was, but she was under the impression Buntaro had died. And all of this conflict within her character is so magnificently shown by Anna Sawai. She was just fantastic in this. Any shot you have, you can just see the emotion and the pain on her face, and it was just so believable. And in terms of a comparison to the book, I thought she did this phenomenally. But Hiroyuki Sanada as Toranaga was the highlight of the show for me. Now, in the book, he was almost a bit too nice in the series, but I think you need that, because you sometimes need audiences to kind of to see a certain character's point of view and why they might do something. So he needs to be a bit likable in order for audiences to connect with him. But he's way more ruthless in the book, and in the book he's probably one of my favourite literary characters. But Hiroyuki Sanada's performance here has almost solidified that actually Toranaga is probably one of my favourite characters of all time, because Sanada just did an incredible job of showing so much emotion and what we need to know through his face. Because he says very little, Toranaga, doesn't he? His actions are defined by the words he speaks to others and the orders he gives and the way he says certain words. He speaks less because he doesn't speak unless he has something important to say. As a character, Toranaga is ruthless in decision making and leadership, but he only shows this side of himself rarely. As I said, he'll only say it if he needs to. What have I got here? So Hiroyuki Sanada got involved in the production of the show. How cool is that? Just helping the producers to make sure the show was accurate and giving them directions of how to do this, and, you know, maybe make this, put this like this, or use this color to make this better. And I thought the dynamic that these three characters had was fantastic, because it was a little trio essentially. You needed all of them to work well together for the story to pay off, because Mariko and Toranaga's storyline mattered to Blackthorne and Toranaga's storyline, which also mattered to Blackthorne and Mariko's storyline. So there was just this little triangle of narratives that they had to get right. And whilst I have a few little issues of how they changed John's character from the books towards the end of the series, ultimately these three actors and actresses and the characters they portrayed were done so well. The show hinged on them being a success. And it was a success. But as well as them come the supporting cast, which were all... I've got all these names here of all these characters that I thought just did a phenomenal job. Yabu, the most likable, horrible guy. Like, his actions were despicable throughout the show. You know, treachery, killing people for the sake of it, ranking deaths, ordering his consort and his little guard to have sex with each other whilst he watched. All these horrible acts that he did, yet you still can't help but just root for the guy a little bit. And I don't know why. There's something about him and the actor and the way he portrayed it and did his part was just incredible. He was my next favourite. You got Fuji, who was Blackthorne's consort when he became Hatamoto, and she was amazing because she did so much acting just with her eyes. You could just see so much sadness in her eyes, and the odd moments that we see, because she was the one who lost her husband and her child at the start of the show. What like a sad character and a poor arc she had in terms of how sad it was. And she had so little to say because her character was probably ordered not to say a lot. But what she said with her face was just a lot more. So it told a lot more than what she could have done with words. She was brilliant in it. Hiramatsu as well, you know, that part where he committed seppuku was just incredible because, my goodness, we were convinced that Hiramatsu was genuinely against Toranaga in terms of saying, I can't follow this order, this is not good. But yet we later learned that, you know, the other vassals of Toranaga were not convinced enough that Toranaga was right to surrender. So Hiramatsu had to do his part and convince them, and he did that by taking his own life. And that scene was incredible, and just the face, the stare between Hiramatsu and Toranaga during that scene was unbelievable. He was brilliant as well. The Omi and the Nagakado relationship was amazing as well, because you've got these kind of two young, I don't want to say proteges, but like two young, they will be leaders, put it this way. They will both be leaders in the future. Or they would have been, had Nagakado not died. And just seeing the naivety of youth come through in them, and having, struggling to accept decisions that their leaders make and questioning them, and then taking things into their own hands on both occasions. But sadness and remorse when it didn't work out, and obviously the death of Nagakado from being too too quick to act, too quick to make a decision that didn't need to happen, obviously led to his death. Buntaro as well, what a character, what a massively flawed character, and the actor completely showed this with his performance, in how much he struggled to deal with things. It was just, and Ishido as well, Ochiba, she said so much, again, just with her eyes, her facial expressions could have told a story that no words ever could. The whole cast was just absolutely brilliant, and you've got this, they all worked so well together, and they used the cast so well. For example, Yabu and Toranaga talking on the cliff at the end, that little monologue that Toranaga gives that explained his whole plan, in the book that was just a little internal monologue, but the writers used Yabu for Toranaga to unleash his plan and say, this is what I've been doing, in order for us to understand it in a better way. Because I don't think that would have worked, just an internal monologue of us watching Toranaga meditate on a hill with words being spoken over. We didn't have that throughout the series, so it would have looked a bit odd coming in at the end. But yeah, the way they just used all these characters to enhance and make the other characters have an outlet was just incredible. So yeah, they're all my positives for the show. I thought, what more can I add? The music was really good as well. You kind of had this, it definitely overall had an orchestral feel, but then there were hints of old traditional Japanese instruments sort of brought in just for certain sections. And again, we kind of get a cinematic vibe with the orchestral sound, but yet we're reminded this is in 1600s Japan when the little Japanese instrument comes in. So that was all fantastic as well. So I got the visuals as well. The CGI, as far as, again, I'm no CGI expert, and I said this with Masters of the Air and Fallout. Really impressive for me. I don't think one thing looked out of place. I really, really enjoyed watching it visually. I already said the costumes were amazing. I noticed some people online were really complimenting Mariko's, her dresses in the penultimate episode, so the episode where she dies. Apparently her dresses were just phenomenal and proper Japanese and looked really stunning. But all the samurai armour as well, just these tiny minute details. There was a shot of Toranaga from the back in the last episode, and I was just looking at the back of his armour, and it was just the detail was incredible. So what's even more surprising is, because this is an FX show or a Hulu show and not HBO, I imagine the budget would be much lower. So I'm just going to find out, see if I can find out what it was. So, that's the 1980 miniseries. Let's see if it says. Right, so they're saying it was 7 million for the ad. Okay, so it's not really actually saying too much. I'm not really getting much from this, but because it was one of these shows, it wasn't one of those like massive series. The budget must have been small or smaller, and I think for them to have done what they did and the way they executed it was nothing short of amazing. Just felt completely immersed from the beginning up until the very, very end. Immersed in this story, immersed in the journey, fully backed up by costumes, sets, props, and then the performances from all the actors, just so unbelievable. Really, really impressive. So I got a couple of negatives, and the first negative is completely my problem. the subtitles and the constant Japanese being spoken through it was actually quite hard to follow. And I found I needed to watch every episode twice because there were things that I missed because I'm trying to read the subtitles and maybe I'm missing an action that happened on screen, or I'm watching the action and I missed the dialogue that happened. So that was quite tough. But again, that's my problem, and it's probably me as like a privileged English speaker. I get I get everything my way, don't I? With it, most series having English language, but it was completely authentic, and that's what I really loved. And I did like that they made the Portuguese dialogue into English. So for anyone who doesn't know, anytime you heard English being spoken, it was actually Portuguese. But obviously, we're just getting it in English. But other than that, it was completely authentic. It genuinely would have made it worse if we had Toranaga and Yabu talking in English. So I completely get it. It was absolutely brilliant, so authentic, but I just struggled to sort of keep up with the narrative. Now, the other thing visually, I think I've seen a few shows do this now recently. We've got this constant blurring and vignette around the edge of the screen, where you've got one character in the middle, and he or she is properly in focus, and then everything around the edges looks like it's been blurred, which I actually was reading about, and it's a thing now that people and shows like doing, but I just don't like it. I really don't like it. That actually does take me out of the immersion, because if I'm meant to be looking at Blackthorne standing on a cliff with trees behind him, then I expect to see the trees defined and clear. But I don't. They're just blurred, and then in the corners of the screens there's the little curvature, the little black parts. And yeah, I just don't like it at all, to be honest. So that's the one thing. But I'm not going to... The show didn't hinge on that, so I'm not going to take that into account too much. Now I'm going to talk a bit about the comparison to the book. So the first thing is the attention to detail in terms of what they brought in from the book was really, really impressive. Things like the samurai uniforms, having the browns versus the greys in Osaka, that was really cool. Just Omi pissing on Anjin on the first episode. The death by boiling, Yabu's kinks, Yabu's obsession with death, Gin's tea house, all these little parts that, like I said earlier, helped immerse readers more. Because if it had just been a straight narrative about Toranaga versus Ishido, you'd have had the book readers going, well, hold, this isn't Shogun, this is just the characters. Because what makes Shogun special is that the book is 70%, it's essentially 70% Blackthorne becoming acclimatized to Japanese culture, and 30% Toranaga versus Ishido. A lot of the book is about the Japanese culture, the customs, the ceremonies, and John Blackthorne learning Japanese, falling in love more with Mariko, and just becoming more acclimatized to that culture. So it was important that we get those parts in. I already mentioned that we got Toranaga and Mariko early, rather than waiting until Osaka, and it was important for that. Yeah, so a few little, I don't even want to call them negatives, because I think they worked for the series. You know, you have to understand that when you make a TV show, it's like The Lord of the Rings. In an already 3-hour movie, they didn't have time to add Tom Bombadil in, because Tom doesn't really add anything to the story. In the book, he serves a purpose. It shows that even someone could be not tempted by the ring. Someone had power over the ring. Anyway, this isn't a Lord of the Rings thing. But yeah, you have to make changes. And I get that the build-up over these 10 episodes brought it so that Blackthorne and Mariko's final moment was way more poetic and way more romantic. But really, they should have been in love by about episode 4 or 5. They should have been smitten with each other. They should have, just been completely head over the heels. Not sort of teetering on, oh, is she still pissed off with him? Does he find, well, why? They almost look like they're arguing. But another thing is that there was quite a big lack of focus on how much Japanese Mariko taught him, because again, like I said, throughout the book she's just constantly helping him and teaching him Japanese. So again, by episode 5 he should have been almost fluent in Japanese, and he should have been head over heels in love with Mariko. But again, I understand that it's more dramatic if you leave it to the end of the series. Now, I put here that they missed a pivotal moment, but then they brought it back at the end, and that is when John tries to seppuku himself. And this is such a vital moment to the story, because when Yabu threatens the village, or I think it was Toranaga in the show, John was not. This was the moment that John, that we as the audience see John embracing this new Japanese culture that he's come to learn and be part of, but not losing who he is himself. Because the idea that, so someone burnt his ship. I can't remember if it's that way in the book, but in the show, someone burns a ship, and Toranaga says the villagers will die until we find out who it was. John is being true to himself and saying other people should not die because a ship was destroyed. This is not fair. So he's being true to himself, but at the same time he's like, right, do you know what? I'm gonna fight fire with fire. I'm gonna give you your, I'm gonna play you at your own game. So I will commit seppuku myself if you don't stop this. And this is a true moment because Mariko starts to see him differently in the book. Yabu starts to give him a massive amount of respect from that, and this is the turning point where the likes of Toranaga, Mariko, and Yabu start treating him differently, more than just a barbarian, now more like one of their own. So that should really have happened halfway through, but again, I understand the dramatic effect it has, leaving it longer. So as the show went on, the first few episodes were really good and they stuck really close to the book. But as the show went on, they started deviating more out from the book. Nagakado hitting his head on the rock didn't happen. I'm not even sure if he died. Toranaga's army didn't suffer that much from the earthquake, yet we're led to believe it was, insurmountable amount of casualties, where actually it's only 150, I think it's 156 people died. Again, I get it. But I think some book readers were a little thrown off as the series was going on. They were kind of like, well, hold on, we started it was really tight, and now we're kind of veering off. But it kind of came back at the end, like I said, with John's seppuku, Toranaga's internal dialogue, and all that stuff. The battle. Now, I think I saw a lot of people were disappointed there wasn't a battle and that we didn't see Crimson Sky be executed. But as Toranaga said, we did see Crimson Sky executed because Mariko was Crimson Sky. Her going in and playing her part so well, that was what Crimson Sky was, because sowing the seed of doubt and powerlessness of Ishido into the other hostages' heads, that was what mattered. Because then it turned the other regions against Ishido. It even turned Lady Ochiba against Ishido. And the same way the battle happened in the book is the same way it happened in the series. One paragraph basically saying Toranaga won. Ochiba took the Taiko's army and gave it to Toranaga. And Ishido was buried in the ground with just his head above the sand or something. So I'll say I was a little disappointed that we didn't get a battle. I kind of thought they could have done that. It's the same in Masters of the Air where we didn't see D-Day. But I get budget permitting. I understand that this is not like the 90s and the 2000s anymore, where we have where TV shows and movies were given so much budgets. It's all about money now and how we can get the best with the least amount spent. So I'd love to have seen that battle. I really would have. And we didn't really get many battles. We got quite a bit of fighting. The bandits in the woods, Buntaro on the dock, the duel. That even when in episode 9, when Mariko is trying to leave Osaka and her retinue are defending her and dying for her so she can leave, we got moments, but to have seen an epic samurai battle, I would have loved that. So I'm a tad disappointed we didn't get it, but I expected it because I know we didn't get it in the book. But I think what matters within this show is it's all about the characters, and this is why I said earlier it's so Game of Thronesy. You kind of got like Yabu's almost a bit like Littlefinger, isn't he? Getting his finger in every pie, trying to work his way to success. But the show hinges on the characters and what they do for each other and how they work together, or not so much. But mainly Toranaga and his devious, clever, crafty plans, and how his quick thinking. Because in the book you get a lot more about Toranaga. You get a lot more about how crafty he is, how far ahead he is of everyone. Anyone who gives him an idea, he's already thought about it and he's 2 steps ahead. So yeah. Other book stuff. The only thing, the Blackthorne. towards the end, we kind of see Blackthorne becoming he's just a little bit impatient. He's a little bit reckless, and he just gets a bit angry about stuff. He's a bit like a little toddler throwing a tantrum because he doesn't get his way, and he wasn't like that in the book. He was crafty. He was politically adept. He knew what games he had to play. To get what he wanted sometimes, but instead we kind of got a reckless, angry man instead who just threw tantrums every now and then. But I think, hold on, what we're in. Yeah, so I think they probably did that to hide the fact that Toranaga had some plans, and we were meant to think, oh, come on, Toranaga, give John his shit back. And yet the producers are there thinking, actually, well, we've got a little thing to tell you about Toranaga later. Um, but yeah, that was my thoughts on the book comparison. I'm not even saying they're negative. It's just interesting how they decided to do it. So I think that's it for all the points I want to talk about. So now I'll just talk about sort of a little summary about what I thought of it. It was brilliant, brilliant, and I might go as far as saying outstanding. It was Game of Thrones done. Or let's be more specific. It was seasons 1 to 5 of Game of Thrones. The good years, done, but with a feudal 1600s Japan setting. And as I said before, and I'll say it one more time, the success was largely due to the characters and the acting. Each that they all had to be perfect. It's like a what's the phrase? Is it like a tower of cards? If one card falls, the rest fall. If one of those characters didn't work, then the rest the rest of the cards would have fallen, because you need each character to act as a foundation for other characters to be built on, and for them for the story to elevate and sort of grow. And if one of them failed, it all would have failed. But all of them were so good. I listed them earlier, so I won't do it again. But yeah, add to that the fantastic world building you have, with the props, the set design, the costume, the music, the filming locations. I said costumes already. Everything, everything I thought was done so incredibly well. And it is one of those shows where there's not a lot of action, but the dialogue and the scripting and the writing needs to be on for it to be immersive, interesting, and engaging. And I was engaged the whole time. Like I said, I liked the tiny little battles and fights and duels and assassination attempts that we got. They were moments of excitement, in an otherwise, I definitely don't want to say dull or boring, but in an otherwise, let's say, largely talkative series where the emphasis was on what was being said, how it was being said, and who was saying it to who, rather than who stabbed who, which army decimated this army. It wasn't action, it was much more talking, but they absolutely nailed it. So yeah, so I am going to go, in terms of my rating, I'm in between brilliant and outstanding. Um, this is really tricky, because outstanding, that sets quite a precedent, saying it's an outstanding series. Yet there are moments that I thought could have been a tiny bit better, which all it means is that it wasn't perfect. So I will do this. I'll commit to this. I will give it a 9 out of 10, which to me is outstanding. I can't really say much more. I think I've said all I need to say. 9 out of 10. Excellent job, especially by a company. I'd expect this quality of series to come from someone like HBO. But they've really made a diamond here in this show. So massive credit to, I don't know who did it, Hulu, FX, Star, Disney Plus, all of them, whatever. Fantastic show. And yeah, 9 out of 10. So that's my final thoughts on the Shogun TV series. I will definitely be watching it again, because it came out weekly, so we've got one episode a week. But now that they're all out, I can't imagine anything better than just binging them in one weekend and just getting them all done, because it's a proper engaging story that makes you want to carry on one after the other. So yeah, they're my thoughts on Shogun. Please let me know, if you're watching this, your thoughts on the show. How would you rate it? What were your favourite parts? Anything you didn't like? And how did you like the way they did it compared to the book? So let me know all of that stuff in the comments. So take care, and I'll see you very, very soon.